The dust-laden wind carried the scent of wild sage as Josephine Walters stood defiantly in the afternoon heat, her emerald eyes fixed on the imposing figure of Gabriel Aldridge. The year was 1877, and the untamed territory of Wyoming cared little for a woman's pride or her heart. "You'll do as I say, Miss Walters, or there'll be consequences," Gabriel threatened, his weathered Stetson casting a shadow over his sun-bronzed face. His 6'3" frame towered over her, but Josephine refused to cower. "I will not marry Thomas Holloway simply because my father owed him money," she replied, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I'd sooner die than be sold like cattle." Gabriel's jaw tightened. He had promised her father on his deathbed that he would look after Josephine, but the stubborn woman seemed determined to make his task impossible. As foreman of the neighboring AA ranch, Gabriel had his own responsibilities that didn't include babysitting a headstrong city girl who'd inherited a failing ranch. She knew nothing about running. "Your father's debts need settling, and Holloway's offer is more than generous considering the state of this place." He gestured to the dilapidated buildings of the Walters' Sunset Ranch. "You've been here less than a month, and already you're turning down the only chance to save what your father built." Josephine lifted her chin. "I didn't travel all the way from Boston to surrender at the first obstacle. I will find another way." Gabriel's patience finally snapped. He grabbed her arm and began marching her across the yard, his grip firm but not cruel. "Perhaps some time to think will change your mind." "Let go of me," she demanded, struggling against him. Her honey-blonde hair tumbled from its pins as she fought, the late afternoon sun catching the golden strands. Without a word, Gabriel dragged her toward the smokehouse, a solid structure built of stone and timber that stood apart from the main buildings. Unlike the other structures on the property, the smokehouse was sturdy and secure, with a heavy wooden door and no windows. "You cannot do this," Josephine protested as he opened the door. "Watch me," he replied, his voice low and dangerous. "Maybe a night alone will help you appreciate the severity of your situation." Before she could respond, he pushed her inside, not roughly, but with enough force to make his point. The door slammed shut behind her, and she heard the sound of the wooden bar dropping into place, sealing her in. "Gabriel Aldridge!" she shouted, pounding on the door. "Release me this instant!" His footsteps retreated, leaving her in the dim interior of the smokehouse. The only light came from small ventilation holes near the roof. The space smelled of hickory and mesquite, remnants of her father's last smoking season. Josephine sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest as angry tears threatened to fall. She had arrived in Wyoming territory with dreams of honoring her father's memory by making his ranch prosperous again. Instead, she found a crumbling homestead, unpaid debts, and Gabriel Aldridge the most infuriating man she had ever encountered. As the hours passed, Josephine's anger transformed into determination. She would find a way out, and she would make that arrogant cowboy regret treating her this way. Gabriel returned to his small cabin on the edge of the Walters property, his conscience gnawing at him. He'd never treated a woman so disrespectfully before, but Josephine Walters had pushed him to his limit. She didn't understand the dangers of refusing Thomas Holloway, a man known for taking what he wanted by force, if necessary. He poured himself a measure of whiskey and downed it in one swallow. The burning liquid did nothing to ease his guilt. Henry Walters had been a good man and a friend, despite his financial difficulties. When Henry wrote to his daughter about his illness, Gabriel had expected a fragile, weeping woman to arrive from Boston, not the fierce, beautiful creature who'd stepped off the stagecoach with determination blazing in her eyes. In the month since her arrival, Josephine had tried to learn everything about ranching, rising before dawn and working until sunset. Her hands, once soft and unblemished, now bore calluses and small cuts. She'd faced each challenge with stubborn resolve, never complaining, never giving up. And now he had locked her in a smokehouse like a misbehaving child. Gabriel cursed and grabbed his hat. It wasn't safe for her to spend the night there. Coyotes might be drawn by her scent, and the spring night still carried a bitter chill. He'd made his point. Now it was time to release her. As he approached the smokehouse, he heard a faint scraping sound from inside. Josephine was likely trying to find some way to escape. The thought almost made him smile almost, but not quite. He'd underestimated her from the beginning, and he was starting to realize just how much. "Miss Walters," he called, "I'm going to let you out now." Silence greeted him. "Josephine?" He tried again, concern creeping into his voice. More silence. Gabriel quickened his pace, reaching for the wooden bar that secured the door. What if she had hurt herself? What if she couldn't breathe properly in the confined space? Guilt and fear propelled him forward as he lifted the bar and yanked open the door. The interior was darker than he expected, the evening shadows having deepened while he was away. He peered into the gloom, unable to see clearly. "Josephine?" he called, taking a step inside. Suddenly, something hard struck him across the back, and he stumbled forward, nearly losing his balance. He whirled around to find Josephine wielding a long piece of wood that she must have pried from one of the smoking racks. "How dare you lock me in here?" she hissed, her eyes gleaming like emeralds in the fading light. "I am not a child to be punished, nor am I property to be controlled." Gabriel raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I came to let you out." "After teaching me a lesson, I suppose?" Her voice trembled with rage. "Did my father ask you to bully me into submission, or is that your own addition to guardianship?" "Your father asked me to protect you," Gabriel replied, his voice softening. "Holloway is not a man to be crossed. He wants this land, and he sees marrying you as the simplest way to get it. If you refuse him outright, he'll what? Kill me? Burn down the ranch?" Josephine lowered her makeshift weapon slightly. "I won't live in fear, and I certainly won't be forced into marriage to avoid threats." Gabriel studied her face, admiring her courage even as he worried for her safety. "There are men in this territory who take what they want without permission. Holloway is one of them. Then we'll face him together," she said firmly. "Not with me cowering behind a wedding ring I don't want." The word "together" caught Gabriel off guard. There was something in her expression, a vulnerability beneath the anger that touched something deep inside him. For the first time, he saw not just the stubborn woman who'd been frustrating him for weeks, but a partner willing to fight for what she believed in. "I apologize for locking you in here," he said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. Gabriel Aldridge rarely apologized to anyone. "It won't happen again." Josephine regarded him suspiciously for a moment, then lowered the wooden plank completely. "See that it doesn't," she replied, but the fire had gone out of her voice. They stood in silence, the small space of the smokehouse suddenly feeling intimate as the last rays of sunlight disappeared, plunging them into darkness. Gabriel was acutely aware of her presence, the soft sound of her breathing, the faint scent of lavender that somehow persisted despite the stronger smells of the smokehouse. "We should return to the house," he said finally, stepping back to give her space. "It's getting dark." Josephine nodded and moved toward the door, but as she passed him, her foot caught on something in the darkness. She stumbled forward with a small cry, and Gabriel reflexively reached out to catch her. His arms encircled her waist, pulling her against him to prevent her fall. Time seemed to stop as they stood locked together, her back pressed to his chest, his arms around her. Gabriel could feel the rapid beat of her heart beneath his hands, or perhaps it was his own heart pounding so fiercely. Josephine turned her head slightly, and in the darkness, he could just make out the perfect curve of her profile, the slight parting of her lips. For one wild moment, he wanted to turn her in his arms and kiss those lips, to discover if they were as soft as they appeared. The thought shocked him into releasing her abruptly. I apologize," he stammered, uncharacteristically flustered. Are you hurt? No, she replied, her voice sounding strangely breathless. Thank you for catching me. They emerged from the smokehouse into the clear night air, the awkward moment passing as they made their way back to the main house in silence. The stars spread across the vast Wyoming sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet, providing just enough light to navigate the familiar path. As they reached the porch, Josephine paused, turning to face Gabriel. In the moonlight, her features were softened, making her look younger, more vulnerable. Mr. Aldridge, she began formally. Gabriel, he corrected her. After everything, I think we can dispense with formalities. A small smile touched her lips. Gabriel, then. I won't marry Thomas Holloway, but I am willing to listen to your advice on how to handle him. You knew my father, and you know this land. I need your help, not your control. The honesty in her voice affected him more than her anger had. You have it, he promised. We'll find another way to deal with Holloway and save your ranch. Josephine nodded, satisfied with his response. Good night, Gabriel. Good night, Josephine. As she disappeared into the house, Gabriel remained on the porch, staring up at the star-filled sky. Henry Walters had asked him to protect his daughter, and Gabriel had given his word. But he hadn't expected the task to be so complicated or for Josephine herself to be so captivating. He had locked her in the smokehouse to protect her from her own stubbornness, only to find himself trapped by feelings he neither wanted nor understood. With a heavy sigh, he descended the porch steps and headed back to his cabin, knowing sleep would be long in coming that night. The following morning dawned clear and bright, with a crispness in the air that spoke of the lingering touch of spring. Josephine rose early, as had become her habit since arriving in Wyoming. In Boston, she had never been an early riser, but the ranch demanded attention at first light. She dressed in a simple blue cotton dress, one of the practical garments she had commissioned after realizing her Boston finery was wholly unsuited to ranch life. Her blonde hair was secured in a practical braid that hung down her back. As she stepped outside to begin her chores, she spotted Gabriel by the corral, already hard at work. For a moment, she simply watched him, his broad shoulders strained against his worn cotton shirt as he repaired a section of fence, his movements efficient and powerful. The memory of those strong arms around her waist made her cheeks warm, and she quickly pushed the thought aside. She had no business thinking of Gabriel Aldridge in such a way, regardless of the odd moment they had shared in the smokehouse. Josephine approached the chicken coop, gathering eggs for breakfast. She had just collected the last one when a shadow fell across her path. Good morning, Miss Walters, a voice drawled, causing her to look up sharply. Thomas Holloway stood before her, his thin lips curved in what he likely thought was a charming smile. He was a tall man with cold eyes and an expensive suit that seemed out of place on a ranch. At 45, he was more than 20 years her senior, with graying hair and a perpetual expression of calculation. Mr. Holloway, she acknowledged stiffly, clutching the basket of eggs closer to her chest. You're on my property uninvited. Soon to be my property, he countered smoothly. I've come to hear your answer to my proposal. Your father's debts won't wait forever. I have no intention of marrying you, Josephine replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And I will find a way to repay what my father owed you. Holloway's smile disappeared. Don't be foolish, girl. This ranch is failing. You haven't the knowledge or resources to save it. Marriage to me is your only option. She said no. Gabriel's voice cut through the tension as he approached, his hand resting casually on the handle of his holstered revolver. His eyes, usually a warm brown, had turned cold and hard as they fixed on Holloway. This doesn't concern you, Aldridge, Holloway snapped. This is between me and Miss Walters. Miss Walters is under my protection, Gabriel replied evenly. And you're trespassing. Holloway's gaze shifted between Josephine and Gabriel, something ugly flashing in his eyes. "I see how it is," he said slowly. "Keeping her for yourself, are you? I wouldn't have expected such behavior from Henry Walters's trusted foreman." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but he kept his temper in check. "Miss Walters has declined your offer. I suggest you leave peacefully." For a tense moment it seemed Holloway might refuse. Then he adjusted his hat and offered a cold smile. "Very well. But this isn't over. Henry Walters owed me a considerable sum, and I intend to collect one way or another." As he mounted his horse and rode away, Josephine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly. Gabriel nodded, his expression grim. "He won't give up easily." "Neither will I," Josephine replied with determination. "This ranch was my father's dream. I won't let it go without a fight." Something like admiration flickered in Gabriel's eyes. "Then we'd better get to work. There's a cattle auction in Laramie next week. If we can get your remaining stock healthy enough to fetch a good price, it might buy us some time." "Us?" Josephine questioned, raising an eyebrow. Gabriel's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You said we'd face Holloway together. I'm holding you to that." For the first time since her arrival in Wyoming, Josephine felt a genuine sense of hope. With Gabriel on her side, perhaps she could save her father's legacy after all. And if her heart beat a little faster when he was near, well, that was a complication she would deal with another time. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of hard work and cautious cooperation. Gabriel showed Josephine everything he knew about cattle ranching, from identifying sick animals to repairing fences. For her part, Josephine proved a quick study, her determination making up for her lack of experience. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, gradually transforming the neglected ranch. The small herd of cattle began to look healthier under their care, and Josephine started to believe they might actually fetch a decent price at the auction. One evening, a week before they were due to leave for Laramie, Gabriel found Josephine sitting on the porch, studying her father's old ledgers by lantern light. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, a pencil tucked behind her ear. "Find anything useful?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. Josephine sighed, closing the book. "Just more evidence of how deep in debt the ranch is. Even if we get a good price for the cattle, it won't be enough to pay off Holloway, let alone keep the ranch running." Gabriel was silent for a moment, considering her words. "There might be another way," he said finally. "Your father mentioned once that there was gold on this land." Josephine's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Gold? Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because it was just talk," Gabriel explained. "Henry never found any evidence to support it, and treasure hunting would take time away from the work that needs doing." "But if there is gold?" Josephine's voice trailed off, hope kindling in her eyes. "If," Gabriel emphasized, "it's a big risk to take." Josephine stood suddenly, pacing the length of the porch. "My father believed it enough to mention it to you. Where did he think it might be?" Gabriel hesitated, then pointed toward the hills that marked the eastern boundary of the property. "He said there was an old creek bed up there that showed promising signs. But Josephine, even if there is gold, mining takes equipment, knowledge things we don't have." "We have determination," she countered. "And what do we have to lose? As you said, the cattle won't bring enough." Gabriel couldn't argue with her logic, though he worried about raising her hopes. "We'll check it out after the auction," he conceded. "But first, we focus on getting the best price for your cattle." Josephine nodded, suddenly looking exhausted. The lantern light softened her features, highlighting the smudge of dirt on her cheek and the weariness in her eyes. Without thinking, Gabriel reached out and gently brushed the dirt away with his thumb. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through him, and he saw Josephine's eyes widen in response. For a breathless moment they remained frozen, his hand cupping her cheek, her lips parting slightly in surprise. "You had dirt?" he explained lamely, dropping his hand. "Thank you," she murmured, a flush creeping up her neck. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken feelings and growing tension. "I should go," Gabriel said finally, rising from his chair. "Early start tomorrow." Josephine nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Good night, Gabriel." As he walked back to his cabin, Gabriel cursed himself for his momentary weakness. Josephine Walters was his responsibility, not a woman he should be thinking about in such a way. Henry had trusted him to protect her, not to develop feelings for her. Yet as he lay in bed that night, Gabriel couldn't forget the softness of her skin beneath his fingers, or the way her eyes had darkened when he touched her. Sleep eluded him as he struggled with emotions he had long since buried, emotions that Josephine was bringing dangerously back to life. The day before they were due to leave for Laramie dawned with unexpected storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Gabriel surveyed the sky with concern as he and Josephine prepared the cattle for the journey. "We might have to delay if this storm hits," he warned. "Driving cattle through mud is asking for trouble." Josephine frowned, leading a gentle brown cow back to the herd. "We can't delay. The auction is our best chance to raise enough money to buy some time with Holloway." "Better to arrive late than lose cattle to injury or exhaustion," Gabriel argued. "Trust me on this, Josephine. I've been driving cattle since I was 14. She sighed, recognizing the wisdom in his words. "Very well, but as soon as the weather clears, we'll leave immediately," he promised. They worked through the morning, securing loose items around the ranch in preparation for the storm. By midday, the sky had darkened ominously, and the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of impending rain. "Get inside," Gabriel called to Josephine as the first fat droplets began to fall. "I'll check on the livestock." "I'll help," she insisted, already heading toward the barn. Before he could argue, the skies opened up, releasing a torrent of rain that instantly soaked them both. They ran for the barn, splashing through rapidly forming puddles, and arrived breathless and dripping. The animals inside were restless, disturbed by the sudden storm. Josephine moved immediately to calm a nervous mare, her gentle voice soothing the frightened animal. Gabriel watched her for a moment, impressed by her natural way with the horse. "You're good with her," he commented, moving to check on the other animals. Josephine smiled, stroking the mare's neck. "My mother taught me to ride when I was little. Before she died, we used to go riding in the park every Sunday." It was rare for Josephine to mention her past, and Gabriel found himself wanting to know more. "You must miss Boston sometimes," he said, securing a loose stall door. A thoughtful expression crossed her face. "I miss certain things, hot baths, proper tea, bookshops, but I don't miss the life I was expected to lead there." "And what life was that?" Gabriel asked, genuinely curious. "Marriage to some suitable businessman, hosting dinner parties, producing heirs," she replied with a wry smile. "My aunt was quite determined to see me properly settled after my mother died." Gabriel leaned against a post, studying her. "And that's not what you wanted?" "I wanted adventure," Josephine admitted. "I wanted to make my own choices, not have them made for me. When my father wrote about his illness, I saw it as a chance to escape the life my aunt had planned and to finally know the father I barely remembered." Her expression grew sad, and Gabriel understood why. She had arrived too late to truly know Henry Walters. He had died just days after her arrival, leaving her with a struggling ranch and more questions than answers. "He talked about you constantly," Gabriel told her, wanting to offer some comfort. "Kept your letters in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. He was proud of you, Josephine." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Thank you for telling me that," she whispered. "Sometimes I wonder if I made a mistake coming here, if I've failed him by not being able to save his ranch. You haven't failed, Gabriel said firmly, and we're not done fighting yet. A crash of thunder punctuated his words, causing the animals to stir nervously. The rain pounded against the roof, creating a deafening roar that made conversation difficult. Gabriel moved closer to Josephine so she could hear him. We should stay here until the storm passes, he shouted over the noise. It's not safe to go back to the house in this. Josephine nodded her agreement, shivering slightly. Despite the summer heat, the rain had left her cold in her wet clothes. Gabriel noticed and shrugged out of his jacket, which had remained somewhat dry beneath his oilskin coat. Here, he said, draping it around her shoulders. Can't have you catching pneumonia before the auction. His hands lingered a moment too long, and suddenly they were standing very close, her upturned face mere inches from his. A drop of water slid from her hair down her cheek, and without thinking, Gabriel caught it with his finger, tracing a path along her jawline. Josephine's breath caught, her eyes darkening as they held his gaze. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, with possibilities neither had dared acknowledge. Gabriel, she whispered, his name on her lips sending a shiver through him that had nothing to do with the cold. He knew he should step away, maintain the proper distance between them. But in that moment, with rain pounding on the roof and thunder rolling overhead, proper seemed very far away. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, he lowered his head until his lips brushed against hers, a question, not a demand. Josephine answered by rising on her toes, pressing her mouth more firmly against his. The kiss deepened, his arms encircling her waist as her hands found their way to his shoulders. The taste of her sweet and warm despite her cold lips ignited something in Gabriel that he had long thought extinguished. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, reality came crashing back. Gabriel stepped away, running a hand through his damp hair. I shouldn't have done that, he said gruffly. It was inappropriate. Josephine's eyes flashed with hurt before her expression closed off. Of course, she replied stiffly, a momentary lapse of judgment on both our parts. The words stung, though Gabriel knew they were for the best. He had no right to complicate her life further, not when she was already struggling to save her ranch. And yet, the memory of her lips against his remained, a warm counterpoint to the cold rationality of his decision. The storm raged on outside, trapping them in the barn with unspoken feelings and a tension that not even the thunder could drown out. By the time the storm passed, the awkwardness between them had solidified into a careful politeness that was somehow worse than open conflict. They prepared for the journey to Laramie in near silence, speaking only when necessary about practical matters. The cattle drive itself required too much concentration and coordination for them to maintain this distance completely. By the second day on the trail, the easy camaraderie they had developed over the past weeks began to reassert itself, though neither mentioned the kiss that hung between them like an unspoken question. Laramie welcomed them with the bustle and noise of auction day. Ranchers from across the territory had brought their cattle to sell, creating a competitive market. Josephine watched anxiously as Gabriel negotiated with potential buyers, her future hanging in the balance of each transaction. To her immense relief and surprise, their small herd fetched a better price than either of them had expected. The cattle were healthy and well cared for, standing out among some of the more neglected stock. As Gabriel handed her the money pouch that evening in their boarding house, Josephine felt a surge of triumph. It's still not enough to pay off Holloway completely, she acknowledged, counting the bills carefully. But it's more than I dared hope for. It's a start, Gabriel agreed, keeping his distance on the other side of the small sitting room they shared. When we get back, we'll look into your father's gold theory. Josephine nodded, tucking the money securely into her bodice for safekeeping. Thank you, Gabriel. I couldn't have done this without you. A shadow crossed his face, some emotion she couldn't quite identify. I gave your father my word, he said simply. Is that the only reason you're helping me? She asked before she could stop herself. Gabriel's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. You know it isn't, he answered quietly. The tension between them returned, thick and electric. Josephine took a step toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. Gabriel. A sharp knock on the door interrupted whatever she had been about to say. Gabriel moved to answer it, his expression guarded. A young boy stood in the hallway clutching a telegram. Message for Miss Walters, he announced, holding out the paper. Josephine took it with a sense of foreboding. Few people knew she was in Laramie, and fewer still would have reason to send her a telegram. She unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the brief message. The color drained from her face as she read. It's from Mrs. Jenkins, she said, referring to the neighbor who had agreed to keep an eye on the ranch during their absence. Holloway's men set fire to the barn last night. She managed to save the horses, but... Her voice broke. The damage is extensive. Gabriel cursed, his fists clenching at his sides. This is his way of putting pressure on you. He's showing what he's capable of. We have to go back, Josephine said, already gathering her things. We have to stop him before he destroys everything. Gabriel caught her arm as she rushed past him. We can't leave tonight. It's already dark, and the roads aren't safe. We'll leave at first light. Josephine wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The journey back to the ranch would be dangerous enough in daylight. First light, she agreed reluctantly. They departed Laramie as soon as the eastern sky began to lighten, pushing their horses as fast as was safe. The journey that had taken 3 days with the cattle took only 1.5 at their accelerated pace. As they crested the final hill that overlooked the ranch, Josephine gasped at the sight below. The barn was a blackened shell, its roof collapsed and walls partially standing in a grotesque skeleton of what had once been. The acrid smell of burnt wood and hay reached them even at a distance. At least the house is untouched, Gabriel observed grimly, and the smokehouse. Mrs. Jenkins emerged from the main house as they rode into the yard, her weathered face creased with worry. Thank goodness you're back, she exclaimed. I did what I could, but they came in the night, 6 or 7 of them. Set the fire and rode off before I could even raise the alarm. Was anyone hurt? Josephine asked, dismounting quickly. No, miss, but it was a close thing with the horses. Got them out just in time. Gabriel surveyed the damage with a practiced eye. We can rebuild, he said, though his tone suggested it would be no small task. But this was a warning. Next time, they might target the house, or worse. Josephine's jaw set with determination. Then we don't give them a next time. We find that gold. After ensuring Mrs. Jenkins was safe and thanking her for her bravery, Gabriel and Josephine prepared to search for the rumored gold deposit. Gabriel had a rough idea of where Henry Walters had believed it might be located, an old creek bed in the eastern hills that had long since dried up. The journey took most of the day, with Gabriel leading the way through increasingly rugged terrain. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a narrow ravine cut through rocky hills, where signs of an ancient watercourse were still visible. This is it, Gabriel confirmed, dismounting and tying his horse to a scrubby bush. Henry said he found color in the gravel bed here, but never had time to investigate properly. Josephine slid from her horse, excitement and anxiety warring within her. This could be their salvation or another dead end. What do we look for? She asked, scanning the rocky ground. Gold is heavy, Gabriel explained, kneeling beside the dry creek bed. It sinks to the bottom and gets caught in cracks and behind larger rocks. We need to check the gravel at the bottom of the old stream bed. They worked methodically, shifting rocks and sifting through the gravel beneath. The sun beat down mercilessly as they searched, hope gradually giving way to disappointment as hour after hour passed without success. Maybe my father was wrong, Josephine said finally, wiping sweat from her brow. Maybe there is no gold. Gabriel didn't answer immediately, his attention caught by something in the gravel he was examining. Slowly, he raised his hand, a small yellowish nugget gleaming in his palm. Or maybe he was right, he said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. Josephine scrambled to his side, staring at the gold nugget in disbelief. Is it real? It's real, Gabriel confirmed. And where there's one nugget, there might be more, Josephine finished, hope surging through her once again. With renewed energy, they continued their search, finding several more small nuggets before the light began to fade. It wasn't a mother lode, but it was enough to suggest that more substantial deposits might exist further upstream. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, Josephine's mind raced with possibilities. We could file a mining claim, she suggested. Use some of the cattle money to hire proper equipment and men who know what they're doing. Gabriel nodded thoughtfully. It's worth a try. But Josephine, we need to be careful. If word gets out that there's gold on your land, Holloway will be even more determined to take it, she concluded grimly. We'll have to work quickly and quietly. The next morning, Gabriel rode to the nearest town to file a mining claim on Josephine's behalf and arrange for the necessary equipment. Josephine remained at the ranch, beginning the cleanup of the burned barn with the help of Mrs. Jenkins. As she cleared away charred timbers, Josephine heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw Thomas Holloway riding toward her, flanked by two rough-looking men. Her heart sank, but she straightened her shoulders, refusing to show fear. Mr. Holloway, she greeted him coldly as he dismounted. I believe I have you to thank for my barn. Holloway smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. An unfortunate accident, I'm sure. These old buildings can be so prone to fire. What do you want? Josephine demanded, acutely aware of her vulnerability with Gabriel away. The same thing I've always wanted, Holloway replied smoothly. This land. But now I'm willing to be more flexible in my approach. Instead of marriage, I'll simply buy you out at a fair price, of course. Josephine's eyes narrowed. This ranch isn't for sale. Everything has a price, Miss Walters, Holloway said, his tone hardening, and I think you'll find my offer quite generous considering the circumstances. He named a sum that was indeed generous for a struggling ranch with no prospects, but with gold on the property, it was a fraction of what the land might be worth. The answer is still no, Josephine replied firmly. Holloway's expression darkened. I don't think you understand the situation. That fire was just a taste of what can happen to those who oppose me. Next time, it might not be the barn that burns. Fear crawled up Josephine's spine, but she refused to let it show. Are you threatening me, Mr. Holloway? I'm explaining reality, he countered. This territory isn't kind to stubborn women who don't know their place. Before Josephine could respond, Mrs. Jenkins appeared beside her, a shotgun cradled in her arms. I think it's time for you gentlemen to leave, the older woman said calmly, though her grip on the weapon was steady. Holloway eyed the shotgun with disdain. You can't watch her forever, old woman, he sneered, and Aldridge won't always be around to protect her. I don't need protection, Josephine retorted, her anger overcoming her fear. I need you off my property. For a tense moment, Holloway seemed poised to do something rash. Then he shrugged, a cold smile returning to his face. Have it your way, Miss Walters. But remember, I gave you a chance to settle this peacefully. As he and his men rode away, Josephine's knees nearly buckled with relief. Mrs. Jenkins placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You stood your ground well, child, she said approvingly, but that man is dangerous. He won't give up easily. Neither will I, Josephine replied, though her voice trembled slightly. This ranch was my father's dream. I won't let it go without a fight. When Gabriel returned that evening and learned of Holloway's visit, his face darkened with anger. "You shouldn't have been here alone," he said, pacing the kitchen floor. "From now on, you don't stay here without me. It's too dangerous." "I wasn't alone," Josephine pointed out. "Mrs. Jenkins was here." "Mrs. Jenkins is 70 years old," Gabriel exclaimed. "She's brave, but she can't stand against Holloway and his men if they decide to use force." Josephine knew he was right, but his protective anger stirred her own stubbornness. "I can't live in fear, Gabriel. This is my home now." He stopped pacing, his expression softening as he looked at her. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'll do everything I can to help you keep it. But please, be careful. Holloway is a man who takes what he wants, regardless of the cost to others." Something in his tone made Josephine wonder if there was history between the two men that she didn't know about. "You know him well," she observed. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Well enough. He tried to take over the AA ranch a few years back, when the owner fell ill. Used tactics similar to what he's using with you: threats, intimidation, property damage." "What happened?" Josephine asked. "The owner's son came back from back east and fought him off," Gabriel replied. "But not everyone has someone willing to stand up for them." His eyes met hers, filled with a determination that matched her own. In that moment, Josephine realized that Gabriel wasn't just helping her out of obligation to her father. He genuinely cared about the ranch, about justice, and perhaps about her. The mining equipment arrived 2 days later, along with 2 experienced miners Gabriel had hired to help with the extraction. Work began immediately, with Gabriel overseeing the operation while Josephine managed the ranch and continued the barn rebuilding efforts. The first week yielded promising results. The gold deposit, while not extensive, was rich enough to be profitable. By the end of the second week, they had recovered enough gold to pay off Holloway's loan in full and still have funds left to invest in the ranch. Gabriel rode into town to arrange a meeting with Holloway, planning to pay off the debt and legally end any claim the man had on the Sunset Ranch. Josephine remained at the ranch with the miners and Mrs. Jenkins, feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time since her arrival in Wyoming. As evening approached with no sign of Gabriel's return, Josephine began to worry. He should have been back hours ago. She paced the porch, watching the road anxiously as the sun began to set. Finally, just as darkness fell, she spotted a lone rider approaching. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Gabriel's broad-shouldered silhouette, but it quickly turned to concern when she realized he was slumped forward in the saddle. "Gabriel," she called, rushing down the porch steps. He raised his head at the sound of her voice. And even in the fading light, she could see the blood on his face. Josephine ran to him as he dismounted unsteadily, nearly collapsing as his feet touched the ground. "What happened?" she gasped, helping to support his weight as they moved toward the house. "Holloway's men," Gabriel grunted, pain evident in his voice. "Ambushed me on the road back. Took the gold." Josephine felt as though the ground had dropped from beneath her feet. All their work, all their hope gone in an instant. But her concern for Gabriel overrode her despair. "We need to get you inside," she said firmly. "You're injured." Once in the house, she helped him to a chair and quickly gathered water, bandages, and the whiskey bottle for disinfectant. Gabriel's face was badly bruised, with a deep cut above his eye. His ribs appeared to be injured as well, judging by the way he winced when he breathed. "How many were there?" she asked as she gently cleaned the cut on his forehead. "4," Gabriel replied, hissing as the whiskey-soaked cloth touched his wound. "They were waiting for me at the narrow pass. Knew I'd be carrying the gold." Someone must have told Holloway about the mine, Josephine realized, her hands stilling momentarily. But who? The miners? Gabriel shook his head slightly. "Doesn't matter now. The gold is gone, and Holloway knows there's more where it came from. he'll be coming for the ranch with renewed determination. Josephine resumed her ministrations, anger building within her as she considered their situation. Then we'll fight him, she said decisively. We still have the mining claim. We can extract more gold. There's no time, Gabriel argued. Holloway won't wait. Now that he knows the true value of your land, he'll move quickly. As if to confirm his words, the sound of multiple horses approached the ranch house. Gabriel tried to stand, reaching for his gun, but Josephine pushed him back into the chair. You're in no condition to fight, she said firmly, moving to the window to peer outside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Thomas Holloway and at least 10 armed men were dismounting in the yard. One of the miners was speaking with Holloway, gesturing toward the hills where the gold had been discovered. He's brought his men, Josephine reported, her voice remarkably steady despite her fear. And it seems one of our miners has been working for him all along. Gabriel cursed, forcing himself to his feet despite the pain. Get out the back door, he ordered, checking his revolver. Run for the hills. I'll hold them off as long as I can. Josephine whirled to face him, outrage replacing fear. I will not run and leave you to die for my ranch, she exclaimed. There has to be another way. Before Gabriel could respond, a voice called from outside. Miss Walters, I know you're in there. Come out and let's discuss terms like civilized people. Holloway's voice carried a note of smug triumph that made Josephine's skin crawl. She glanced around the room, desperately seeking a solution. Her eyes fell on her father's old shotgun mounted above the fireplace, and a reckless plan began to form in her mind. Keep them talking, she whispered to Gabriel, moving toward the fireplace. Gabriel caught her arm, his eyes searching hers. Whatever you're thinking, it's too dangerous. Trust me, she pleaded. Please, Gabriel. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, releasing her arm. Josephine quickly retrieved the shotgun and checked that it was loaded while Gabriel moved to the door. Holloway, he called out, his voice stronger than his battered body suggested. This is private property. Take your men and leave. Holloway's laugh carried easily through the evening air. I don't think you're in a position to make demands, Aldridge. Not after the beating my boys gave you. Send out the woman, and maybe I'll let you live. While Gabriel continued the exchange, buying time, Josephine slipped out the back door and circled around to the smokehouse. The solid stone structure stood apart from the other buildings, its heavy door still bearing the scars from when Gabriel had broken it to release her all those weeks ago. Moving quietly in the gathering darkness, Josephine made her way to the smokehouse and slipped inside. She quickly positioned herself at one of the small ventilation holes that offered a clear view of the main house and yard. From here, she had a perfect vantage point and the protection of stone walls. Raising the shotgun, she took careful aim at the ground near Holloway's feet and fired. The blast shattered the tense standoff, sending Holloway's men diving for cover. Holloway himself stumbled backward, his face contorted with rage and surprise. That was a warning shot, Josephine shouted from the smokehouse. The next one won't be. Taking advantage of the confusion, Gabriel appeared in the doorway of the main house, his revolver trained on Holloway. You're outnumbered, Holloway, he called. Best take your men and go while you still can. Holloway's eyes darted between the house and the smokehouse, clearly trying to assess his odds. You're bluffing, he sneered. There are just the two of you. As if on cue, Mrs. Jenkins appeared at an upstairs window of the main house, her shotgun visible in the fading light. And from the direction of the miners' camp came the sound of approaching horses, the loyal miner returning with help from town. Josephine fired again, this time deliberately splintering the wood of the hitching post near Holloway's horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly trampling Holloway as he jumped aside. I'm not bluffing, Mr. Holloway, she called, her voice steady and determined. This is my land, and I will defend it. Now take your men and leave, or the next shot won't miss. For a tense moment, it seemed Holloway might order his men to attack anyway. Then, with a curse, he signaled for retreat. "This isn't over, Walters," he shouted as he mounted his skittish horse. "No piece of land is worth dying for." "This one is," Josephine replied, not lowering her weapon until Holloway and his men had ridden well beyond the boundaries of the ranch. Only then did she emerge from the smokehouse, her legs suddenly weak with the aftermath of adrenaline. Gabriel was waiting for her, his face pale with pain but his eyes bright with admiration. "That was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing I've ever seen," he said, reaching out to steady her as she approached. Josephine smiled shakily. "Perhaps a bit of both," she admitted. But it worked. The approaching riders turned out to be the loyal miner returning with the sheriff and several deputies. After hearing their story and examining Gabriel's injuries, the sheriff promised to arrest Holloway for theft and assault. "We've been looking for a reason to put that snake away for years," he explained. "With your testimony and the stolen gold as evidence, we might finally succeed." As the excitement died down and the sheriff departed to pursue Holloway, Josephine found herself alone with Gabriel on the porch. Night had fully fallen, the stars spread across the Wyoming sky in a dazzling display that still took her breath away after months in the territory. "Will he come back?" she asked quietly, her eyes on the distant horizon where Holloway had disappeared. Gabriel sighed, wincing slightly as his injured ribs protested the movement. "Not if the sheriff catches him, and if he doesn't, we'll be ready." The word "we" warmed Josephine more than it should have. "You don't have to stay, you know," she said, not looking at him. "You've more than fulfilled your promise to my father. The AA ranch would probably welcome you back." Gabriel was silent for so long that Josephine finally turned to face him. His expression was thoughtful, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight as they studied her face. "What if I don't want to go back?" he asked softly. "What if I want to stay?" Josephine's heart quickened. Why would you want to stay on a struggling ranch with a woman who gets locked in smokehouses and shot at by land-hungry neighbors? She attempted to joke, though her voice trembled slightly. Gabriel reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek in a gesture reminiscent of their kiss in the barn. "Because that woman is the most remarkable person I've ever met," he said simply. "Because when I'm with her, I feel alive in a way I haven't in years. Because I think I'm falling in love with her." The words hung in the night air, honest and vulnerable. Josephine covered his hand with her own, turning her face to press a kiss to his palm. "And what if she feels the same way?" she whispered. "What if she's been fighting those feelings because she thought you were only helping her out of obligation?" Gabriel's eyes darkened. "Then I'd say we've both been fools," he murmured, drawing her closer. This time, when their lips met, there was no hesitation, no pulling away. The kiss deepened, fueled by the day's dangers and the emotions they had both kept restrained for too long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Josephine rested her forehead against Gabriel's chest, mindful of his injuries. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. Gabriel's arms tightened around her. "Now we rebuild the barn," he said, a smile in his voice. "We continue mining the gold. We make this ranch what your father always dreamed it could be. Together." Josephine lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "Together," she agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. 3 months later, the Sunset Ranch was transformed. The new barn stood proudly in place of the burned structure, larger and sturdier than its predecessor. The cattle herd had been expanded, and the house had received much-needed repairs. Most significantly, a small but profitable mining operation continued in the eastern hills, providing the funds for all these improvements. Thomas Holloway had been captured trying to flee the territory and now awaited trial for his crimes. The stolen gold had been recovered and returned to its rightful owner, one more victory in a season of triumphs. On a crisp autumn evening, Josephine stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. The sound of approaching footsteps made her smile before she even turned to see Gabriel coming up the path. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he remarked, coming to stand beside her. "Perfect," she agreed, leaning into him as his arms slipped around her waist. They had been married 2 weeks earlier in a simple ceremony attended by their neighbors and friends. The band on her finger still felt new, but the love that had brought them to this point felt as natural as breathing. "I was thinking," Gabriel said, his tone casual, though Josephine detected an undercurrent of excitement. "Now that the ranch is secure, perhaps we should consider expanding." Josephine raised an eyebrow. "More cattle?" "Eventually," he nodded. "But I was thinking more along the lines of family." A warm flush spread through Josephine at his words. "Mrs. Jenkins did mention that the old cabin by the creek would make a perfect home for her if we needed more space in the main house," she replied, trying to match his casual tone despite the happiness welling inside her. Gabriel turned her in his arms, his expression serious now. "Are you saying yes?" "I'm saying that I love you," Josephine answered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "And that nothing would make me happier than building a family with you, on this land that we fought so hard to save." Gabriel's smile was brighter than the setting sun as he pulled her close. "I never thought I'd be grateful for locking someone in a smokehouse," he murmured against her hair. "But if I hadn't, we might never have found our way here." Josephine laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful ranch yard. "Next time you want my attention, perhaps try flowers instead," she suggested teasingly. "No next time," Gabriel promised, sealing the vow with a kiss as twilight descended on the Sunset Ranch, wrapping them in the quiet beauty of their hard-won home. Spring arrived at the Sunset Ranch with an explosion of wildflowers and new life. The cattle herd had grown, with calves dotting the green pastures. The mining operation continued to be profitable, though now overseen by trusted employees rather than Gabriel himself. His attention these days was focused closer to home, specifically on Josephine and the child they were expecting in the summer. As they sat together on the porch swing one evening, Gabriel's hand resting protectively on Josephine's growing belly, they reflected on how far they had come since that first confrontation at the smokehouse nearly a year ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Josephine asked suddenly. "Choosing to stay here with me instead of returning to the AA?" Gabriel's answer was immediate and certain. "Not for a single moment. This is where I belong with you, with our child, on this land that has become more of a home than anywhere I've ever lived." Josephine smiled, covering his hand with her own as she felt the baby move beneath their joined fingers. "I think he agrees," she said softly. "He?" Gabriel questioned, raising an eyebrow. "Are you so sure it's a boy?" "Just a feeling," Josephine replied with a mysterious smile. "Though I'd be equally happy with a daughter who has your stubbornness and my aim." Gabriel laughed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Heaven help us all if that's the case. One shotgun-wielding Walters woman is enough for any man to handle." As the sun set over their prosperous ranch, casting long shadows across the land they had fought for and won together, Josephine leaned into her husband's embrace, grateful for the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A locked smokehouse, a broken door, and the courage to fight for what they believed in, these were the foundations of their love story, written across the wild and beautiful landscape of Wyoming territory. And as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they dreamed together of the future they would build, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced all others together, with determination and with love.